She is one of the eminent personalities of the Austrian diplomacy. I have to say that she represented her country in Moscow, Washington, New York, Berlin, Bratislava, Tunis, London. So you see that if we want to find a person who saw the world from the different perspective, one of them would be, I'm sure, Gabriele Matzner-Holzer. She was in Bratislava five years, from 96 to 2001. It was a turbulent period in the Slovak political history, and I have to say that Frau Gabriele was one of the best experts on the Slovak politics. She has even written a book about the Slovakia. The book is sold out. It's one of the best books which was written about the Slovakia in last years. She traveled around the Slovakia extensively. It's a shame, but I have to say that in last summer I visited for the first time Trenčanské Teplice, and I was informed that Frau Gabriele Matzner is a honorary citizen of the Trenčanské Teplice. So I'm glad that she is with us. We will proceed as usual. She will be given 30 minutes to present her thesis. Then we will give 10 minutes to Martin Muránsky to comment her thesis. Then we will ask the question and open the discussion to the public. So, Frau Matzner, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Ďakujem pekne. Dobrý večer. I'm very glad to be here. As Professor Novosád said, my life, diplomatic life, brought me to a number of places, and the last one I was in was London, where I was Austrian ambassador to the United Kingdom. But now I am retired, and I'm glad to be retired. It gives me some time to think. And I'm glad to be here, to come here and talk about something that I have thought about a lot in recent years. I should also like to add that my husband, Egon Matzner, who was with me here, also in Slovakia, during the time mentioned, was a professor of socioeconomics. And he was one of the few, I would say, who very early on criticized what is going on in the economics as an academic discipline and what is going on in the real world in the sense of the domination, absolute domination of the financial markets over the so-called real economy. By now, the real economy, which is like producing and other production and other services, is only a fraction in terms of profits and business volume. And we are a tiny fraction of what is going on every day in the worldwide financial markets. And my stay in London, which is one of the epicenters of financial business, called the City of London, gave me some opportunity to observe what is going on. This was before and during the financial crisis, which started in 2007 and 2008, when I was still there. Maybe because I was there, who knows. I must say I recall that every time I was somewhere, something happened. When I was in Berlin in the 80s, I was Consul General in West Berlin. The wall was still standing, and when I left, it was gone. When I came to Slovakia, Mečiar was still Prime Minister, and when I left, he was gone.
So far, so
Then I changed to, they, probably because of my successes, sent me to the desert, to Tunisia. And I left Tunisia in 2005. It took some years to have an effect. But in 2011, the dictator was sent away. So I consider this also one of my achievements. Finally, in London, the financial markets crashed. And then the new Labour government. And now I return to Austria. We'll see what happens next. No. So I said I've been doing some thinking, and this is not first of all, it's of course not an official presentation. I'm no more a representative of the Austrian government, fortunately. Sometimes very difficult to explain what they're about. But I'm a free person. I am allowed to say what I think, which, by the way, is a constitutional right in Austria, that even as an official, you are allowed to have an opinion. I think this is a great achievement. So I'm not talking in any official function, and also I'm not an academic. I'm not an expert. I have no tenure, no place in university on this, but I'm not sure overall whether the so-called experts, especially the economists, always know what they are talking about. Especially if you compare it to what's happening in real life and what they say is the economic wisdom of the day. The subject of the day is very broad, and I should not want to go into any specific details. The two anchors of my presentation, one is democracy, and the other one is globalization. Democracy is one of the terms, and I don't think I have to lecture you on what it is. In my view, there's no agreed definition, of course, of what it is, and it takes various forms, and opinions on it can be different. But basically, in my view, it means an as equal as possible participation of the largest possible number of people living in a state or a community, city, but their participation in various means in the decision-making processes concerning decisions which have an effect on their lives. I think this sounds very wishy-washy, but that is, in my view, a broad, not definition, but outline. And of course, there are some preconditions to the exercise of this participation, right to participation, like basically political rights, the right to assemble, the right to form parties, associations, groups, the right to form opinions, to express opinions, freedom of opinion, the right, of course, equality before the law, the rule of law in general, the freedom of information, and last not least, the freedom of choice. So if there are elections, which are normally taking place in democracies from time to time, there is a choice. There are different parties, and you are free without fear to choose a party. Also, in my view, one of the preconditions of a good functioning of a democracy, at least in modern times, is the need that the political system overall offers something to the broad spectrum of the population. It offers, for instance, services, good public services, schools, health, transportation, infrastructure, rule of law, meaning like a legal system that really functions. And citizens have become used also to expect from their state, which was called and still is called a welfare state, that the public or the state, whatever you may call it, takes care of some very fundamental needs of people, not just, as I mentioned, in education and health, but also in pension and if you're poverty or if you're sickness, that the state has a role to play. And for this, of course, the state needs money. It needs income. It needs to have resources, also financial resources. It needs infrastructure, schools, railways, whatever, streets, infrastructure that is necessary. And it needs taxes. It needs taxes. And where the taxes are come from, that is again a question of how the society, how the state, the economy is organized. I will come to that later. So I think those are some of the ideas around democracy. The other term we use tonight is called globalization. It has become a fashionable, it's like it was already 20 years ago, but never mind. Globalization still is a very fashionable word, and there is no definition what it is, but different elements of different forms of globalization include all sorts of things like the internet. You can occur the possibilities of communicating across the globe in no time, and to exchange views and data and lies, whatever you want, and to talk to your grandmother in Australia, and to transfer money in no time from one end of the world to the other. For instance, if you have the fortune to make a little money aside and you don't want the taxman to have it, you transfer it in no time to one of the many, many tax havens where rich people park their money. This goes from Cyprus to Austria to Switzerland to the British Islands, tax havens, and the amount of tax which is not paid to states is incredibly high. Nobody knows how exactly high it is, but it is enormous. And if all this money could come back, so to speak, to where it belongs, you could finance schools and streets and a good health system and universities. This is my personal opinion. It's actually a huge scandal, the amount of tax evasion, illegal often, illegal. It's not just all criminal money laundering or so, it's legal. And the money is gone. I mean, if you think of how much money from the Greek families, there are 2,000 Greek families I read who own like 80% of the property in Greece. And they transferred their money, which is much more than what the European Union now is giving to Greece. They have it in Swiss and other banks. It's one of the huge problems to which has to do with globalization. It's not that globalization is at fault that these things happen, but, and I'm not against globalization, there are lots of benefits, as I mentioned, the ability to communicate and associate across borders. You can drink Coca-Cola now in Nigeria as well as in Alaska, and many other benefits. Free trade, you can have, for instance, in Slovakia, you have the good fortune now to have, already when I was there, garlic from China. So I think this is considerable progress. Well, but I don't want to be too negative on globalization. It does have its advantages, but one of the things that is often overlooked, that globalization does not only mean communicating and selling and buying and exchanging. this and that. It also means a set of rules which have been more and more dominating politics and economics over the last more than 30 years, which are deregulation, privatization. These are the main rules, and the selling of public services to private profiteers, and so on and so on. I'll come to that later. These rules are often called the Washington Consensus, because there was at the time these rules were developed, of course, by experts, by economists in the international financial institutions, originally for developing countries many years ago. And but then this set of ideas, which also is called neoliberal, was also instrumental in the transformation of the former communist countries. These were the rules of the game: privatization, deregulation, and not always to the best benefit of the people who live in these countries. Now, there is a lot of criticism. This is my third point, so to speak, after having briefly described democracy and globalization. There is a lot of concern about democracy nowadays in many European countries, very many European countries, in Austria also. And it's not just because of scandals which keep popping up, scandals that are usually come out many years after the fact, and are usually connected with some sort of privatization of all sorts of things. But it is a general unease about whether the democracy is still worth, whether it's still functioning. And for instance, one of the reasons is that it is less and less, in Austria it's still quite good, less and less providing the goods, or the goodies, if you so want, that usually associated with the welfare state. Another principle of the Washington Consensus and neoliberalism is austerity. The state and the state authorities on all levels, from the state to the community, are supposed to have a balanced budget, to save money. So they're cutting down at the behest of also international institutions, but also out of their own decision. They're cutting down expenditure all the time, and they're cutting down at personnel in the public services. They're cutting down teachers, policemen not so much, because they are needed then for the rebellion which might arise. But they are cutting down wherever they can. Maintenance of all sorts of things. Austria, as I say, is not so bad, because Austria is still trying to steer a middle course. But take countries like the one I was in, the last one I was in, United Kingdom, except for a few areas where the rich live, streets are run down, roads are run down, schools are run down, the public services are cut and cut and cut, and with the expectation that if they cut expenditures, then they will have a balanced budget and so forth. But as we can now see in the case of Greece, which is taking a similar course because it's forced to, these kind of austerity principles do not lead to a balanced budget. On the contrary, they ruin the economy. And with the slowdown of economic development, the imbalance in the budget actually increases. So this recipe doesn't work, but nevertheless is continued to be imposed on those states which have debts. But there is this problem of trust in politics, also in Austria, for a number of reasons. One is corruption, and the other one is the loss, one could say in general, the loss of the ability of the state authority to provide for basic services or the decline, let's not say loss, at least not in the case of Austria, we're still quite good, as I said, the decline in the ability of politics, of the state, to provide for basic needs of the population. And another reason is that that this ideology, which I mentioned, is this Washington consensus, neoliberal, austerity, privatization ideology, which has been dominating for the last 30 years, is so pervasive, is so ever-present in almost all political parties, not only in the right-wing or liberal parties or conservative parties, but also in what is called the social democratic parties, which moved to the center and adopted the neoliberal agenda. That goes, for instance, for Tony Blair's New Labour. That goes for Schröder in Germany, who took the course of what he said was the third wave, the dritte Weg. In Austria too, to a lesser extent. And these parties, which used to, social democratic parties, which used to take care of the interests of those who are less fortunate in life, who have all sorts of, who are not on top, not on top. These parties, for a long time, gave up what used to be their agenda. They are now slowly returning to it, very slowly, carefully, at least some of them. But since there is a little difference between in Austria, two main parties, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, people, they all say the same, so to speak, and we see this in many countries, or do the same once in power. So there's no difference. So people tend to go to the extremes. They go to the, since the middle is, what's the choice, so to speak. They go to the left extreme or to the right extreme. In Austria, it's rather the right extreme. They also have no recipes. They also are neoliberal. But this is a way to protest against this lack of choice that the democratic parties represent. There's also a great dissatisfaction with democracy at the European level, because there you have the same picture. You have the pervasive domination of this ideology, and the recipes that come out from the various bodies in the European Union against, for instance, this so-called debt crisis, which, by the way, started out as a bank crisis, but the banks were saved at the expense of the populations. And now we have a debt crisis because huge funds went into the saving of these banks and of the economy, incentives to keep the economy afloat and so forth. And these debt crises, the recipes that are more or less dictated, because there is this troika, who the IMF and the European Commission and the European Central Bank, they impose certain conditions which have to be met for instance, the Greek to get this money, which, as we know, the next day goes back to the German banks and the French banks. Because we are not saving Greece. We are saving the banks again. Because the Greek have debts with the German and French and other banks, among other things for the weapons they kept buying from German and French weapon producers. And so this money which we are giving kindly to the Greek is straight away going to the German and French banks. And nobody talks about it. It is maybe a well-kept secret, but it is not unknown. And these measures, this austerity and so forth, is also a political danger. You can already see, and I have full understanding, the Greeks are mad at the Germans, and the Germans are mad at the Greek. So this is not very good for Europe. And I would like to tell you, this just came to my mind, of anecdote. As Slovaks, you should be familiar with anecdotes, at least the older ones among you. A German arrives at the airport of Athens, and the Greek border policeman asks him, name, Fritz Müller. Nationality, German. Occupation, no, just visiting. I don't know whether you understood it. Occupation has two meanings. Occupation means if you, occupation is a job, yeah, a profession, but also the occupation of a foreign power in your country. This refers to something a long time ago. There is an increasing hostility, mistrust, estrangement among, was promoted by the media, who are very sensational and superficial, between the Greek and the Germans and then the French and the Spanish and so forth. And there are also tendencies of separation. I wouldn't say that the origin is this ideology or this democratic crisis. These movements have existed for a very long time. For instance, the Scots would like get rid of the British, and the Catalans would like to become independent from Spain and such things. And if this goes on and on, I don't think it will be easier to run Europe if we have another 10 or 15 new countries. Whatever sympathy I have, for instance, for the Scots. But I don't think it is progress. So I do believe that these concerns and their movements now, and new parties, the Pirates, for instance, also in Austria, I don't know whether you have them here already, or these Occupy movements. We'll see what comes out of it. Things are changing as they're always changing. And so maybe I should, I don't know, I spoke too long already, and I should probably stop, but just the books that brought us here together are, and I'm not making any profit on this, written by a British professor called Colin Crouch, and one became very famous called Post-Democracy, and there's another one he published later, Post-Democracy, and it was translated into many languages, and it is more popular in Europe than in the United Kingdom. He claims, he says a lot of these things I have mentioned about the power of the big business and financial markets, how politics become servants to the interests, profit interests of private, small private groups of rich people, how the gap between the rich and poor is widening all the time, and there's a lot that there's proof of it, there's endless proof of this, and how this is endangering democracy. And his theory, he calls it post-democracy, is basically that democracy, which is not surprising in my view, is nothing stable, that there are various stages, that there is a beginning. There was even a time before democracy, before modern democracy, during the tyranny or the monarchies and so forth. And then there were movements to gain rights, political rights, economic rights. And then there was a time shortly after the Second World War when actually, it's a Keynesianism, the welfare state was in bloom. And then there's a crisis of the welfare state. And now, during the time that the welfare state was in bloom, that was, in his view, the best times for democracy. And now for the last 20, 30 years, we have passed this period of the climax of democracy and entered a phase of post-democracy, where, so after democracy, it's still democracy, and especially all the institutions that we are used to that make up a democratic scheme, like elections, parties, parliament, governments, the rule of law, all of this is still in place, but in the background, another game is running, another show is sort of playing. And he thinks that it goes sort of up and down, and there may be a time when democracy, the real democracy, may either be saved or may return. But it would take, for this, it would take, first of all, the awareness of and the discussion, public discussion of what the problems are, different views on this certainly, and that there are problems with democracy and they are related to the economic sphere and not just to the institutions, that they're related to the social and economic functioning, these problems of democracy. And once this is maybe discussed and openly addressed, then democracy will take another phase again. And for this, it needs what we call the civil society. We cannot expect things from above, from the politicians, or even from lots of the media, which are part of this system. We had the citizens have to discuss this and maybe develop some initiatives. And I do think that this is at least what is starting to happen. There are lots of discussions and lots of movements, at least in Austria, which is amazing enough. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your contribution. And now, Martin, you have 10 minutes for comments.
I would rather say, after such a presentation, I have to pose the question, should I stay, should I go? Because we spoke and we listened every concrete topic related to the notion of post-democracy to be mentioned in Novien. I dare to speak with my broken English in respect to this audience in Novien, but do not expect so much from me. You know, as it was mentioned, post-democracy is a very modern notion, and it has different meanings. You can listen about post-democracy if the people speaks about low turnout of elections, that people who goes to elections are minorities in compared to the people who do not go to the election. The last evidence for this are regional election in Czech Republic. There were just about 30% of voters which went to the elections. It means that the majority of the citizens which are living in the democratic states and the states are running the democratic rules do not participate in the public life. This is first basic meaning of the word of post-democracy, that even in democratic societies we see that non-elected power dominated over the elected power. The second, maybe more German discussion is connected with the European Union, you know, that how the decision of on the European level are to be made, you know, and you see that such decisions are not made in the European Parliament but in the non-elected European Commission. And since the crisis 2008, this is not even the European Commission who takes the decision, but European rate. It means this is the institution which involves prime ministers of the member states. It means that the decisions on the European level are made by the minister-president of national states. And this is again the question of the legitimacy of the European project. And such questions are posed in the difficult time of financial and economic crisis, you know, and maybe the basic meaning of the post-democracy is that in the last 20-30 years we see that the differentiation between rich and poor is growing, constantly growing. It means that you see the concentration of the wealth and power on the one side. This is this 2,000 Greek families who owns 80% of Greek's property, but this is not just the Greek case, this is the case of 1% against 99%, Occupy movement, etc., And such a concentrated power is not elected in the normal sense, but has great influence, not just over the market, but also over the state. And post-democracy, like let's call it political theory, is posing the question that the traditional way of thinking that we have to think two great traditions, the first one prefers social state, the other one free market, that such a differentiation between market and social state is overcome. We have to think twice about our relationships, about the relationship of multinationals and their influence on the state political agenda on the one side, and in the term of the free market. Both state and market are changing by domination of corporations. It sounds like very leftist radicalism, but it is not the case. And this domination of non-elected power over the elected power is based on such a concentration of wealth and influence on the one side, and let's call it dependencies of the political class, dependencies of the citizens on such a huge economical power. Where are we going to go? That's the crucial question now. I would say that the European Union will be the project which can have an influence on forming some kind of alternative to such a domination of corporation on the political and public life on the one side, and also the free market, because free market are no more free. If you see such an example like distribution chains which drive out competitors from the free market, our supermarket agenda in the Slovakia, you see that we just listen neoliberal. This is about the free markets, but in practice, it is concerned with the dominance of the corporation over the public life. It means we have weaker states and less free markets. And how to deal with such a state of affairs? That's the basic question. And maybe I would say on the level of the national state in the Europe there is no answer. And this agenda cannot be tackled by the national states. They are too weak, On the level of the European Union, we can expect a lot, but in reality, the political agenda of European Union was the way how to introduce a neoliberal approach to the especially new member states, So the questions are open, and let me conclude with quotation from the book Colin Crouch, the last book, which is called The Strange Non-Death of Neoliberalism. According to Professor Crouch, the economic crisis will not lead to a change in the neoliberal economic model because the structure of power in the Western world is such that those who have an interest to keep the system going are in a dominant position. And now is coming the quotation. My prediction, that's the opinion of Professor Crouch, is that through the model is one that will continue to have a crisis because of the inherent instability of the financial model. People will just keep on putting it back on the road, fixing it, putting it back on the road because there is no counter-hegemonic. There is no similar powerful alternative in the term of the political influence and economical influence. So that's the last provocative remark, and I give the floor Ambassador Matzner.
No, I think, thank you. Yeah, not much at this stage. I should not But I want to quote Adorno, this German political scientist or philosopher. He said, if voting could change the system, not the government, but the system, if voting could change the system, it would be illegal. No, but I agree, of course, with most what you said. I'm not very optimistic about the EU as it is now with this Politburo that has been constituted to fight the financial crisis. Merkel and Sarkozy, but basically Merkel. I don't think that, I don't see anything on the horizon, but who knows, maybe there may be eventually a change of mind. And especially if I think what is actually needed, it's true, there is no counter hegemony at present, but it may eventually form, and with a lot of pressure from below, this pressure might get annoying enough and that the problems, I mean, if you think of the unemployment of young people in Europe, this is absolutely a disaster. You have 25% unemployment of young people all over Europe. And in Spain, it's more than 50%. Here's 30, this is incredible. I just might recall that this was the reason, one of the main reasons, I would say, of the revolutions in the Arab countries. In addition to the fact that such young people, not only do they have no income and so, but they cannot get a start in life. And what is a start in life in these traditional countries, Arab Muslim countries, involves marriage. You have to marry and you have to have children. This is the start into life, apart from a job. So one of the slogans on Tahrir Square in Cairo, I was told, was, "We want to marry." And maybe it's not that way here because you have other ways of living together without marrying. But it is, in my view, the most disastrous problem of Europe at the moment. And it should be addressed most urgently. But I think you might have some questions. You're the moderator, yeah?
Now I understand why we changed the position. Professor Novosád made this proposal that I should make a comment, and now I am clear that he was very rational in that change, of positions.
Sorry, I didn't do it.
I have just a question, maybe a very naive question. Is the problem of contemporary world a problem of democracy? Is the real problem how to return the democracy again into the plane? Isn't the more serious problem the problem of status of politics? Because the politics was colonized by the economy, by the will of making profit, and would be not one of the part of the solution the return of the state. And of course, it should happen if it happens not in Slovakia, but in EU, because EU can function as a state, and I hope that it will in future function as a state. The second possible case in USA. What happened with USA is that the politics of the government is colonized by the will and interests of the multinationals. So is there any way how to make a state stronger?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Well, I think you're right. That's the basic issue, how to reclaim or reconquer the public sphere from, it has been privatized or commercialized, not sold, but but sort of submitted to the same rules as private market public services. They must compete, they must have prices, they must have new management, they must have targets, all these kind of management rules which normally apply to business and not to the state. I think it is essential that there be, again, this awareness. I come to that, that these are different things, public services and business, and that they follow different rules. Whereas in the market sphere, in business, whatever it's services or production, one of the basic aims, if not the only one, is profit. But, and that's perfectly legitimate, and capitalism has produced great results over the past. There was always crisis from time to time, but basically very good results in procuring goods and services. But there are services, mostly services, also goods, which are of necessity public, and there is a reason for it that they were public for a very long time, because they do not and cannot and should not be profitable. They are for the community. And there is as a matter of fact, I'm not an expert, but in Austria we have more and more discussions, also involving other experts from other countries, under the title Reclaiming the Public Goods and Services. And there are, for instance, at the local and regional level, there had been some privatizations and outsourcing of services in the recent years, of all sorts of garbage collection, of refugee camps, of water transportation and so forth. And now they find out what they could have known before, that these outsourcing under various titles like PPP or PFI, whatever, is in the end more expensive, 50% up more expensive than if the public state or community had taken up a credit in order to finance a new road or a new school or whatever. And now they pay for 30 years, they actually have losses for over 30 years, and the services are not as good and more expensive. For instance, in London, when I was there, and I found out that they had privatized the water system, the canalization and the water system, a long time ago. Like they privatized the buses and the trains and so forth, and one disaster after the other. But in the case of the canalization system, they invest nothing. They don't repair the pipes, because that's an investment. They have to make profits for their shareholders. And also the public officials who negotiated this treaty with the private provider, overlooked one little aspect of what then turned out a disaster, namely the public canalization services had taken care of the canalization, cleaned it, repaired it, and so forth. This was all in the contract. But they also had on the side, this is just a little example, but very bizarre, on the side, these canal people from the city of London, from London City, had killed the rats. This went along, as they were doing the work, they regularly poisoned the rats. There are, of course, millions of rats in London. And now this service was not included in the contract with the private company. And there was a huge problem with rats over a very short time. No, I think you're right. This is the most important thing that, and people are learning. Some mayors and local and regional politicians and even up to the highest are starting to think maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Trying to, at least in some ways, get this back and getting out of these contracts to reclaim the res publica, the public things. But it won't be easy because there's a lot of profit to be made in these services by the private providers. And so I don't think it will be a fight. And yeah, I'm not a politician, but I think it is necessary to fight.
Thank you. Well, we know that there is almost no one, well, there are lots of people who offer solution to European crisis, global crisis, but they are usually not well taken, or they are not very profound or implemented. For example, two prominent individuals, Krugman on one side, the prominent economist and writer for the New York Times, and Neil Ferguson, Scottish economist, who attacks Krugman viciously and is for kind of a neoliberal solution. Krugman is, again, for more spending public money and so on. Now, we know that European Union is trying hard, or the leaders are trying hard to find a solution to solve this crisis, and we don't know how it will end up. Because it is really not a science. We know that economic is not a science, so we don't know. It's the human and political factor is so important. And you mentioned at the end of your first section of your talk that civil society should be revived. Now that's something that really would take lots of years, maybe decades, to really influence this current crisis, which is a very urgent crisis. The civil society debates and mobilization of the local, the decentralization and so on, that takes many years. Now, could you, and evidently you criticize the financial sector and the banks and then Professor Novosád mentioned that perhaps the state should be stronger, regulating banks more, or making sure that they pay the taxes and so on. Is there in your view, any set of measure that could be done by politicians? Those are not kind of ideal things that are almost impossible to do, but are there any concrete set of measures, be it political, economic, that would really be of great help, that could be done by politicians? They might not do it for various reasons, for ideological reasons, political, and so on. But is there any set that, for example, the civil society, the people, could take as their own? Because you could have two brilliant representative of these two very different views, and if you listen to one for 2 hours, you might agree with him or her. And then the another person starts speaking, you know, this is this Krugman, Neil Ferguson. There's these 4 read lectures in London and New York that Ferguson delivered a month ago. And they're very brilliant, pure neoliberal, almost conservative. And it makes lots of sense. Krugman makes sense as well. So would you have any of those that we could see that would help very quickly, or not very quickly, if the politicians were ready to do, if the society were ready to implement? Because there might be that there is no solution to current crisis.
Next job might be President of the European Union, if I get this right. No, of course it's very important to ask. I cannot have an answer naturally. I just want to say I'm not taking this as, you didn't say this, but I don't think we're talking about a moral issue overall. That the greedy people and the bad people, the bank people, the financial people, this is what Popper, Karl Popper would say, the logic of the situation. If you give people a chance to be crazy or to be greedy and without punishment, they will, and not all of them, but enough people will act this way. So it is, you won't change, or we won't change human nature, which is partly good, partly bad, but we have to change the, in German, Rahmenbedingungen, the conditions under which people act. By laws, by incentives, all sorts of education, mindsets, or the ways of influencing, and if need be, by penal law, so send them to prison. But you won't. You have to have these rules. That's why the giving up basic rules of how things are done in the economic sphere by deregulation. Just let them do. The market will save it all. It will come into balance. Everything will be fine for everybody if you just let the market forces work. This never worked, and there was always together these two, and maybe with the society, whatever it is, three elements that interact and hopefully in good times work for the best of all, which is the market, the free market, yes, not totally free, responds whatever rules, and the public sphere, the state, who does the rules and provides infrastructure and so forth, and the society. And they need each other. The market also needs the state. It's not that the market doesn't need the state. And can just float around in outer space. And I think this balance of market and or capitalism, if you so want, and a public authority has to be re-established by regulation, re-regulation in the economic sphere, particularly in the financial sectors, starting with the introduction of certain taxes, certain levies on financial transactions. They already started with this, plus authorities on, of course, the international level, at least European, to control this system. It won't be easy because they will find thousands of loopholes to save their money from the taxpayers' grab. But this should be an aim, and I think that this already started at the European level. And then, for instance, let the banks go bankrupt. Now that they know that they will always be saved, whatever disaster they cause, they are more courageous than ever. They're just speculating, you name it. I mean, all over the place, and speculating on the euro. And the euro going up, speculating on the euro going down, speculating on the ruin of Greece, speculating on the ruin of Spain, and that's another issue. Since the deregulation, it didn't always used to be the case. Where do governments or states get their money from? And now it's the banks and the financial markets. So the financial markets hold the trigger. They can say you up and you down. You today up, tomorrow down, and the governments are sort of running all over the place, afraid what the financial markets might feel, whether they are in a good mood or in a bad mood, with these rating agencies who made huge mistakes already in evaluating, for instance, Greece. They said Greece is a wonderful, wonderful economy just a few years ago, and now it's a basket case. And the governments are being chased by the financial markets. I find this scandalous. You have to get this power back from the financial markets by all means. And I'm not an expert, but one of the things might be that you change the rules of the European Central Bank. They say it is not possible because it's against the treaties. Well, change the treaty. The European Central Bank, should be the one responsible for financing states. Or again, as it used to be the case, that the states themselves generate the money they need if they don't get it through taxes, that they print money, and so to speak, and that they sell bonds within their own countries. Lots of ways there are to get money and to save the budgets of states from the financial markets, and also take away from the financial markets the currency trade. Between euro, now it's only euro, and various other currencies. They're making huge profits by dealing in currency markets. Just take it away from them. This has to be global. This cannot even be a Europe, it has to be global. And then go away from the Maastricht criteria. The Maastricht criteria that states must only have 3% new indebtedness, 60% overall budget deficit in a year, and they're now even making these rules more severe. And these rules are absolute counterproductive in my view. They lead to recessions, and they're of course imposed by the Germans in exchange for their giving up the D-Mark for the euro. It's a German idea, and the Germans are obsessed with inflation. Ever since they had, we too by the way, in the 20s, huge problems of inflation. So all they see is the stability of the currency and of the prices, and not that the politics of a central bank also has to be to stimulate economy. Like the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States has as its aims not just fighting inflation and keeping stability of currency and money provisions, but to stimulate the economy. And this is excluded in the, more or less excluded according to the Maastricht criteria. States have lost the power to stimulate their economy. I'm not talking for endless debts making, 200%, 300%, as the United States has. But I think there has to be a reversal away from austerity politics towards more stimulation of the economy and particularly the labor market.
I don't know if this is working. I just thought I'd maybe try to offer a British perspective. The ambassador has spent some time in London. I hope I'm from Britain, that's why. I don't have any sort of particularly wider agenda than that. I'm sorry that your stay was so dominated by infestation of rats and decaying infrastructure, but I hope there were some positive points to your time there. I just wanted to put a bit of perspective from a British point of view about things like, you've been talking about privatisation, and Mr. Muránsky mentioned supermarkets, for instance, of which, of course, Tesco is a leading example here in Slovakia and has quasi-hegemonic powers, I think you might characterise it as. The privatisation process in Britain is perhaps not as unpopular as it may have been in other parts of Europe. I agree with the examples of water and what you call canalisation, the sewerage system, has in some cases turned out badly. The railway privatisation has been an ongoing disaster. But there are many other privatisations which have been enduringly popular, and is part of the reason why, as you said, Blair's New Labour adopted the mantle of Thatcherism, the original movement that privatised these things. In the 1970s, it was impossible to get a telephone within 6 months because you were dealing with a government bureaucracy that didn't work. And after British Telecom was privatised, people found that they were able to get a telephone line in a week. And nobody wants to go back to the system that prevailed before. The same thing with things like British Airways, which was publicly owned and is now private. It might be having trouble, but at least it's not at the expense of the taxpayer. Equally, I would say that the large supermarkets such as Tesco, Sainsbury's, which have taken over huge parts of the food retailing market and other retail markets in Britain, while they evoke concern about their dominance, and there are periodic reflections about the demise of smaller shops in city centres, are generally hugely popular, as evidenced by the fact that most people go there to buy their weekly shopping, not because they have no choice, but because the food is of a consistently high standard and of a consistently low price, and that is what most consumers are interested in. Whether it's in their interests or not, that's what their day-to-day interests, where their interests lie. And as a result, they're not hugely unpopular in the way that perhaps you would argue Tesco might be here. And finally, just the British view of the EU. And I have to say, these aren't all my views. I'm just trying to represent the way that Britain might look at this from a kind of a semi-detached position within Europe. Professor Novosád mentioned that an EU state in some form might be a solution to some of the problems that are emerging. In Britain, I would say the European Union has close to zero political legitimacy. And I don't mean that from a kind of party political point of view. I just mean that nobody that I know or have ever met knows who represents them in Europe other than the government, the national government, or how Europe works. And I suspect the same is probably true here. That doesn't mean that the opinion of Europe is similarly negative, but from a British point of view, most people see the European Parliament as just a huge boondoggle. It's just a boondoggle, as the Americans would call it. It means a way to make money for the people involved, and beyond that, of almost no relevance at all. The European Parliament has just been an ongoing source of anecdotes, not just anecdotes, but real instances of corruption and expenses claiming which wasn't justified in one thing or another, and yet nobody can clearly explain to British voters what it does or what power it wields. Although that power is real, there's no popular understanding of how it works, the system works in Europe. And I think that explains a lot of the scepticism that Britain has towards Europe, and also reflects the fact that Britons, for all of their reservations about their own government, regard it as more legitimate than the European system. Whereas I think the opposite sometimes prevails here in Slovakia, where people see Europe as a kind of salvation for some of the domestic political problems that exist here. And sorry, one other final point, I don't want to labour this, is I thought it was very interesting. You mentioned that people are developing more civic conscience and developing civic societies to discuss issues which affect them and try to reach some kind of consensus or solutions about public goods, how they should be governed. But the irony is, of course, that is precisely what politics is supposed to do. That's supposedly what politics is for. And if civic societies have to do that, then you wonder what is the purpose of having politicians and politics. And I think partly the problem is that the politicians, well, I don't think partly the problem, I think a lot of the problem is that politicians are not being held to the standards or level of accountability that they should be. They're allowed to get away with things that in previous periods they wouldn't have been allowed to. And I think part of the role of journalism and civic society should be to hold them to account. Thank you.
I definitely agree on the last point that that would be a major role to sort of drive the politicians from different directions and to make them more accountable, also by these means of civil society protests and motions and movements to make them more responsive. And well, I'm not sure whether the fact that certain things are popular, that people sort of use them without complaining too much, is really proof that, seen from a more overall perspective, that these things are are good for society. I'm not talking about Tesco. I mean, Tesco obviously is fine with me, but some other developments that took place, not only in the UK, in privatization and sort of commercialization of services, whether the people use them and don't complain. I'm not sure whether this is a very good argument. When I was there, I read numerous reports from experts, knowing that experts are not always the most, but still experts, and for instance, parliamentary committees on the PPPs and the PFIs and so forth, and they were almost all of them were very negative of what the services, the state of the services and the financial costs involved. And it was like similar in Austria 40 years ago, that it took weeks, if not months, to get the telephone. But the fact that I'm not sure, I don't think it has been really proven that apart from what is typically provided by a market, that services have to be worse when they are provided by public. That it doesn't have to be that way. And it doesn't have to be privatized in order to improve. There must be other ways, and there are other ways that you can make public services more responsive to the needs of the so-called customers. I think it is possible, and is happening from time to time. Just briefly on about the European Union, having been there, especially during the Austrian presidency of the European Union in the year 2006, I was fully confronted with the skepticism, to say the least, of many people in Britain against the European Union institutions and so forth. The feeling is shared by many others in Europe, in what the British...
Here in Slovakia, is regularly less than 20%.
Yeah, they don't know who these people are, what they're doing, and so it would be nice if there would be more, how to do this. I don't know that people really take an interest what these people are doing there in Brussels and elsewhere, but that is also a problem, of course, in Austria, that this distance between the citizens and what's happening in Brussels, but with the politicians running around, whenever something is happening in a country which the citizens maybe not like too much, then our politicians will say, well, it's Brussels, and we have nothing to do with it. And actually, they have a lot to do with it, what's happening. And by the way, I must compliment the British diplomats and other public officials. I think they are among the most efficient and influential in Brussels, because the British diplomats are really first class. And they have the advantage of speaking the lingua franca of Europe. Officially, there are other languages, but everybody speaks English, and the ones who speak it best are the English, no wonder. And so they have an enormous influence, de facto, through their really well-trained and great capacity, the fact that they speak English, and the fact that they know what they want, and especially they know what they don't want. And so the question, I don't think in the end, I don't know what you think, I have a feeling that Cameron is in a difficult position, sort of with his promises here and there and so on, being half marginalized, they say, in Europe. And then again, Europe is very important for the British market, especially the financial market. So I don't think they really, so the economic forces wouldn't want the country to leave, but the popular, I think the popular vote might well be for leaving. And it would be a pity, although understandable, but I doubt it that it will happen. I have some sort of feeling it may not happen. In any way, it would be another crisis.
Are there another questions?
Just one short remark in my broken English, that there are different perspectives in which you can speak about post-democracy. The one is that this everydayness evidence that the private service runs better and more efficiently than public service, and etc. But if you ask, if you pose the question about the reasons of the crisis, of the crisis, which they cost are extremely high, then you have to ask yourself, what does it mean, the regulation of financial services, the regulation of investment banks, and then you have to ask yourself, what is the reason of our ongoing crisis now, and what are the costs of such a crisis, and who pay this cost, And you see that we are living not very easy times now. The crisis is not so much visible, in our part of Europe, But look at the south of the Europe, Look at the people in Greece and Spain, There are, I would say that also in the terms of the future, extremely high cost. To be absolutely honest, you have to analyze the situation, ask yourself, what are the where is the problem, of the current crisis? And you see that the regulated financial market is the part of the problem, big part of the problem, And from this point of view, this domination of corporations, and speculation on the financial market is something which has to be asked, And we do not see any change in the behavior of the political world towards the financial crisis. Tomorrow is starting the new summit in Brussels about the bank, and this is maybe the direction in which should we go, But as I told you at the beginning, you have to make differentiation between this everyday perspective. Private business are running much more better than the public business, and this is also the big question: if private pension systems are running better than state pension systems, etc. But on the other side, there is the open question: what is the problem, and what are the reasons of our crisis, and what are the costs which has to be paid for this crisis by the taxpayers, not by the banks. Thanks.
So, questions, remarks, positions? So, if not, I would thank you very much for your presence and for your contribution. The same applies to Martin and, of course, for you that you were with us to the end. So, I am not sure if there is prepared some refreshment. Yes, please. In the Spitzer room in the building.
Next door.
So, thank you very much.